Chapter 5. Egyptian Legacy, Preservation and Trade. The Nile's Bounty, Preservation of Fish and Fowl. The Nile gave Egypt everything: water, fertile soil, fish, birds, life itself poured out in a single generous flood each year. But in the brutal heat of North Africa, that life was brief. A fish pulled from the river at dawn could be rotting by noon. The flocks of birds that darkened the delta skies, beautiful today, poisonous tomorrow. The Egyptians needed a way to hold on to the Nile's gifts. And they found it: salt. Picture the banks of the river as the floodwaters pull back. They leave behind shallow pools, warm, sun-baked, heavy with mineral. And along the edges of these pools, workers move in long, organized lines. Their skin is darkened and hardened by the sun. Their hands are crusted white with salt. They rake the crystals into gleaming pyramids on the mudflats. The air is extraordinary. Sharp, thick, the clean bite of salt mixing with the deep, oily smell of thousands of fish being split open and cleaned on the shore. The technique was precise, almost surgical. Each fish was cut along the spine, the gut removed. And then the cavity was packed with coarse salt, layer after layer, fish after fish, stacked into great ceramic jars or laid out in courtyards under the merciless sun. The salt did something remarkable to the flesh. It pulled the water out, drew it through the tissue like a sponge absorbing rain, and as the moisture left, so did the rot. The biological clock stopped. A fish that would have spoiled in hours could now last for months, years even. The same process was applied to birds, quail, duck, crane. Their delicate flesh hardened and preserved, turned into a food that could travel hundreds of miles without changing. This was not just cooking. It was the birth of an industry. The preserved fish, the ancient Egyptians called it bouri, became a currency of its own, a portable, durable protein that fed the masses. And it fed something else too. 20,000 workers hauling stone blocks up the face of the Great Pyramids, day after day, month after month. Without salt-cured rations from the pharaohs' storehouses, that labor force would have collapsed. The pyramids would have stayed as dreams. Salt did not just preserve the fish, it preserved a civilization. 2. Antiseptics for eternity: salt in the mummification process. In ancient Egypt, death was not the end. It was a transition, a journey into the realm of the gods. And for that journey, the body had to survive. Not for a year, not for a century, forever. The Egyptians had a place for this work, a sacred chamber called the House of Beautification. Here, in dim, cool silence, the embalmers performed a ritual that would last 70 days, and salt was at the center of it. The mineral they used was called natron, a naturally occurring salt harvested from dry lake beds in the desert, a white, powdery substance with a sharp, alkaline bite. To the Egyptians, it was a gift from the gods. The process began with the body. The internal organs were carefully removed, set aside, placed in stone jars for safekeeping in the afterlife. And then the empty body was buried. Not in earth, not in sand, in salt. A mountain of dry natron was piled over the corpse, covering it completely. And there it stayed, for 40 days. In silence, in darkness, the salt worked. It drew the moisture out of every cell, every layer of tissue, every fiber of muscle. It pulled the water from the body like threads being drawn from cloth. And as the moisture vanished, so did the bacteria that fed on it. The rot could not survive. When the embalmers finally uncovered the body, what they found was extraordinary. No longer a corpse, a statue, hard as leather, dark and dry. But the face, the features, still intact, preserved with an eerie, haunting clarity. The skin was then washed, anointed with oils of cedar, sealed with resin, and wrapped layer upon layer in linen. A body built to last millennia. Today, when we look at the face of Ramses II, We are looking at a man who died over 3,000 years ago. His features are still sharp, still recognizable. That is the power of salt. The Egyptians understood something profound, something almost spiritual. To save the soul, you must first salt the skin. 3. Seafaring merchants spreading knowledge across the Mediterranean. Egypt had mastered the art of salt, and now it was time to share it with the world. The ports of the Nile Delta hummed with activity. Great wooden ships sat heavy in the water, loaded with clay jars, each one sealed, each one filled with preserved fish, cured meat, salted grain. These ships were not just cargo vessels, they were carriers of knowledge. As they sailed to the rocky shores of the Levant, to the sun-drenched islands of the Aegean, to the wild coastlines of the Western Sea, they brought with them something far more valuable than salt itself. They brought the secret of how to use it, how to turn food that spoils in days into food that lasts for months, how to feed armies on the march, how to survive a voyage across open water. This was not a luxury, it was a revolution. Stand on one of those ancient docks, close your eyes. The air hits you in layers, the salt spray of the sea, the sharp woody scent of pine resin sealing the hulls, the thick, rich smell of cured fish baking in the sun. Scribes stand at the edge of the quay, papyrus scrolls in hand, recording every exchange. Salt for copper from Cyprus, salt for timber from Lebanon, salt for silver from mines at the far edge of the known world. The Greeks watched, and they learned. They took the Egyptian knowledge and made it their own. They developed their own brines, their own curing techniques, a pungent fish sauce, rich, dark, and intensely savory, that would become one of the defining flavors of the ancient Mediterranean. The Romans would later take it even further, but it all began here, on these docks, with these ships. Salt was the first truly global product, the first substance so essential, so universally needed, that it forced strangers to become trading partners, enemies to become collaborators. It stitched the ancient world together, one preserved jar at a time. 4. Saharan sources, the ancient salt basins of Africa. The Nile held salt. The sea held salt. But the deepest, richest salt of all lay in the heart of the Sahara. Beneath the endless dunes, beneath shifting sand and scorching wind, there were lakes. Not lakes of water, lakes of salt. Ancient seas that had dried up millions of years ago, leaving behind vast, flat basins of pure white crystal. Ghost oceans baked into the earth. One of these basins was called Tagaza, a place so remote, so hostile, that it barely appeared on any map. And yet, it was one of the most valuable locations in Africa. Picture the scene. The sun is blinding. The light bounces off the white salt floor until the air itself seems to shimmer. The miners squint through veils of dark cloth, protecting their eyes from the glare. They dig with iron picks, through layers of sand, through clay, down to the solid bed of salt beneath. And there they hew. Each slab is cut with care, shaped into a uniform block, nearly 100 pounds each, the perfect weight for a camel to carry. These slabs were called the gold of the desert, and in some markets they were traded for actual gold, pound for pound. Because in the humid, sweltering tropics of West Africa, salt was the one thing that could keep the body from breaking down, the one thing that could stop the food from rotting before it reached the table. Now the journey begins. The caravans. Thousands of camels, stretched out in a line so long it disappeared into the haze of the horizon. They moved like a slow golden serpent across the sand. Navigated by men who could read the dunes, who could find their way by the cold light of the stars, who knew this desert the way a sailor knows the sea. Mile after mile, day after day, the heat pressing down, the sand shifting beneath hooves. And at the end of the journey, the great markets. Timbuktu, a city of scholars and merchants, where a slab of Saharan salt could buy you a handful of gold dust. The trade linked two worlds, the white salt of the north, the yellow gold of the south, connected by nothing but camel and courage across the most hostile landscape on earth. Salt had conquered the desert.
5. Scientific primacy. Egyptian versus Babylonian techniques. Two great civilizations, two great empires of the ancient world, and between them, a quiet, fierce competition. Not over territory, not over armies, over salt. Egypt and Babylon each believed they had cracked the code. Each had developed techniques the other had not, and each was building an industrial empire on the strength of that knowledge. The Egyptians were the masters of drying. Their salt science was built on one obsession: remove the moisture, kill the rot, freeze time itself. They did it better than anyone. Their mummies, preserved for thousands of years, are the proof. Modern scientists still marvel at the cellular detail, the precision, the perfection of the process. Egyptian salt was a ritual, a sacred act, slow, patient, reverent. The Babylonians were something else entirely. Situated between the Tigris and the Euphrates in the rich, wet plains of Mesopotamia, the Babylonians were practical, industrial, always experimenting. They were the first to sort salt into categories. They recorded their findings on clay tablets, pressed with wedge-shaped marks in neat, precise rows. Mountain salt, river salt, bitter salt, each one named, each one studied. And their kilns were a marvel. Where the Egyptians relied on the slow patience of the sun to evaporate their brine, the Babylonians built ovens, clay vessels heated over fire. They could control the temperature, control the process, pull out different minerals at different stages. It was primitive chemistry, but it was real chemistry. They used salt to cure leather, to color pottery, to strengthen clay. They understood that salt was not just a preservative, it was a tool, a catalyst, a key that unlocked 100 different uses. Egypt looked backward into the past, into preservation, into eternity. Babylon looked forward into industry, into invention, into the future. And here is the remarkable thing: neither one was wrong. Over time, the knowledge of both civilizations began to merge. Egyptian drying techniques met Babylonian heating techniques, and together they created something greater than either could have built alone: a combined science of salt, a shared understanding that would eventually pass to the Greeks, to the Romans, and onward into the world we live in today. Two rivals, one mineral, and between them, the first true chemistry on Earth.